My fiancée told me I was small, not in height, not in some abstract metaphorical sense, but as a person fundamentally small, the kind of man who peaks at exactly where he is and goes no further, and she said it in my own apartment in front of her sister Blythe and Blythe's husband Kyle on a Wednesday evening in November. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on the floor of a one-room log cabin somewhere in the boreal forest north of Hearst, Ontario, reading a letter my father had written 6 years before he died. And the letter was telling me that the 160 acres of rock and muskeg and black spruce my brother had been quietly laughing about for a month was sitting on top of a lithium deposit worth somewhere between $95 and $120 million Canadian. But before I get to the letter, I need to tell you about everything that came before it, because the cabin didn't make sense without the context, and the context was 39 years of being the second son in a family where second meant something specific. My name is Donovan Firth. In the fall of 2023, I was 39 years old. I worked as a licensed land surveyor at a mid-sized firm in Hamilton, Ontario, a job I'd been doing for 14 years. I measured things for a living: property lines, elevation changes, legal boundaries. I was good at it, the kind of good that comes from being methodical rather than brilliant, the kind of good that means you don't make mistakes that end up in court. Senior colleagues requested me for the complicated files, not because I was fast, but because my measurements were always right. My brother Sterling Firth was 4 years older and a corporate lawyer at a Bay Street firm in Toronto. He'd made partner at 36. He lived in Forest Hill with his wife Claudette, who was originally from Montreal and who had opinions about everything and expressed most of them in a tone that suggested she was doing you a favor by lowering herself to your level. They had 2 kids and a Volvo and a wine membership, and the particular ease of people who have never seriously questioned whether their life was going to work out. My father, Bernard Firth, had been a civil engineer. Retired at 62, quiet man, the kind of quiet that is an economy of words, a preference for doing over talking. He and my mother Ruth had built something solid over 43 years, a house in Oakville, a modest portfolio, a life that didn't ask for admiration. My mother passed in February of 2023, ovarian cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. My father was at the hospital every day. He sat beside her bed and read her the newspaper out loud, which was not something he'd ever done in their entire marriage, and when she died he drove home, sat in the kitchen for 6 hours, and then called me and said, "She's gone, Donovan. That was it. That was the whole call." He died 8 months later, heart attack. October 2023, he was 71. The doctor said his heart had simply been under too much stress since February. I thought about how on certain things my father had been more honest with his body than he ever managed to be with his words. The will reading happened the second week of November in the offices of a law firm on King Street West in Toronto. Tara, my fiancée at the time, came with me. We'd been together for 2 years, engaged for 7 months. The wedding was set for the following June. Tara worked in marketing at a pharmaceutical company in Mississauga. She was smart and organized and had clear ideas about what her life was supposed to look like. I understood this about her. I just didn't understand until that November how much I was failing to fit into that picture. The lawyer, a white-haired woman named Patricia Elms, handled estates with a practiced calm that I imagine comes from watching too many families fall apart at a conference table. She read slowly, which I appreciated. Sterling received the family home in Oakville, estimated at $1.9 million, the investment accounts totaling just over $600,000, the collection of vintage pickup trucks my father had spent 20 years quietly restoring in the garage, and a 40% stake in a small property management company my father had co-owned with a friend since 1998. Then she read what I received. A 160-acre parcel of land in northern Ontario in the Cochrane district, approximately 80 kilometers north of Hearst. A log cabin on the property, single room, no power connection. A sealed envelope, my father's handwriting on the front, Donovan, open only when you're at the property, to be delivered to me along with the deed. And $9,000 in cash for travel. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something awkward has been confirmed rather than discovered. Claudette put her fingers over her mouth. Sterling looked at the table. Tara's face moved through 3 distinct phases in maybe 2 seconds. Surprise, then calculation, then something that settled into a cold, flat disappointment. I watched it happen. I'd been watching Tara's face for 2 years and I knew her expressions well, and the one she had in that conference room was not grief or confusion. It was the expression of someone arriving at a conclusion they'd been postponing. I kept my face still. I'd been keeping my face still in difficult rooms since I was about 11 years old. Patricia Elms looked at me. "Do you have any questions, Mr. Firth?" "No, thank you." "The funds are available today. The envelope and the deed will be couriered to your address this week." Sterling cleared his throat. "Patricia, did our father leave any explanation for how the estate was structured?" Patricia Elms opened a secondary folder. There was an additional note your father wrote, and I'm quoting directly. Sterling receives what is visible because he is built to manage what is visible. Donovan receives what I value most. Do not interfere with what he finds." End of quote. Sterling blinked. What he finds? That was your father's language, not mine. We left separately. Tara and I took the GO train back to Hamilton, 50 minutes, and she spent 40 of them looking out the window without speaking. When we got home, she said we needed to talk. I said, "Okay." "Your father left you a shack in the bush, Donovan. He left me a property and a letter. A letter you have to travel 800 kilometers to read." That's what he asked. Tara sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me with the particular patience of someone who has decided they are being more reasonable than you. "Do you hear yourself? Your father just told the entire family, in a legal document, that Sterling was the son who mattered. Sterling got the house and the money and the company. You got trees and a note, and your response is to book a flight to Northern Ontario." I want to read what he wrote. "He wrote it in a swamp, Donovan." I didn't say anything. She pushed back her chair. "I called Blythe and Kyle. I want them to come for dinner Wednesday. I want to talk this through as a group." I should have said no. I'd been saying yes to things I shouldn't have said yes to for most of my adult life. Not out of weakness exactly, but out of a habit of accommodation I'd mistaken for decency. So I said okay. Wednesday dinner, our apartment. Tara made pasta, the good kind with the homemade sauce she only made when she wanted the evening to go a particular way. Blythe arrived with a bottle of Chianti and the careful warmth of a woman who knows something is coming and wants the atmosphere to be soft when it lands. Kyle, Blythe's husband, worked in private equity downtown and wore the easy confidence of someone who had never once in his adult life worried about money, wore it without realizing he wore it, which made it harder to resent. The first hour was careful. We talked about other things. Kyle mentioned a Leafs game. Blythe asked about the wedding venue. Tara refilled wine glasses with more frequency than the conversation required. Around 9 o'clock, Kyle asked about the estate, genuinely curious, not cruel. So what actually ended up happening with the will? Tara answered before I could. Sterling got everything. Donovan got a cabin in the middle of nowhere and $9,000. Wow, It's fine, I said. There's a letter. I think there's more to it than how it looks. Tara laughed. Not a small laugh, a real one, sharp and sudden, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, half-second too late to catch it. "I'm sorry, a letter, Donovan, in a cabin. Do you know how that sounds?" "Tara," Blythe said quietly. "No." She set her glass down. "No, I've been sitting on this for 2 weeks and I'm tired of being the supportive one. Do you know what it's like to introduce you to people, Donovan? To say, this is my fiancé, he marks property lines for a living. And that was fine. I made peace with that. I told myself it didn't matter. But your father just confirmed in front of a lawyer and your brother and his wife that you're the one who got the leftover life." The table was very quiet. "You are small, Donovan," she said it without raising her voice. Flat, almost tired, not in a cruel way, just small. "You've always been small, and I've been telling myself for 2 years that you were going to grow into something. And your father's will was the first completely honest thing anyone in your family has ever said about you." She picked up her coat from the hook by the door. "The ring's on the nightstand. I'll get the rest of my things on the weekend." She looked at Blythe and Kyle. "I'm sorry, thank you for coming," and she left. The door closed behind her, and the sound of it went through the apartment like something settling. I sat at the table with my future sister-in-law, who looked like she was trying to find the right words, and Kyle, who was very specifically studying his pasta. After a moment, Blythe put her hand briefly on mine. I didn't know she was going to do that. "I know." "She's been." "It's okay, you should go." They left. I cleaned up the kitchen. I stood at the counter for a long time. Then I went to the nightstand and looked at the ring. A simple solitaire, white gold band. I'd paid it off over 9 months. I didn't pick it up. I went to my laptop and booked a drive-through route for Friday morning. I drove up instead of flying. I needed the time. Highway 400 north from Hamilton through Barrie, then 11 north through North Bay, Matheson, Cochrane. 8.5 hours. I stopped at a Tim Hortons in Cochrane at 2 in the afternoon, double-double, a breakfast sandwich I didn't particularly want, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes watching trucks move along the main road. Cochrane in December is the kind of town that isn't trying to be anything other than what it is, and I appreciated that about it more than I could explain. I had the address of a man named Rémi Beausoleil, who lived 40 kilometers north of Cochrane in a small place that wasn't quite a town but had a gas station and a post office and a hardware store. My father had written his contact information in a note clipped to the deed. Rémi has looked after the property for 8 years. Pay him fairly and trust what he tells you. Rémi was 64, broad-shouldered with a face that had spent 6 decades in northern Ontario winters and looked entirely suited for it. He was Métis, born in the region, and he'd done maintenance work on my father's property since 2015, checking the roof each spring, clearing deadfall from the trail, making sure the cabin didn't surrender to the weight of winter. My father had paid him every year by check, accompanied by a short note. "Your father was a quiet man," Ramey said. "We were standing outside his truck in the cold. He came twice a year, spring and fall. He'd walk the whole property, check the cabin, make notes in a little book he always carried, and then he'd stand at the edge of the backfield. There's a clearing where the trees thin out and you can see the rock formation beneath the snow, and he'd just stand there, looking, every single visit. He'd do that before he left." What was he looking at? Ramey looked at me the way people in remote places look at you when they're deciding how much to say. I think he was making sure it was still there. He drove me out on his snowmobile 14 kilometers off a logging road that hadn't seen regular traffic since October. The property was exactly what it had been described as: boreal forest, Canadian shield granite beneath the snow, a frozen creek running along the north edge, and a small cabin with a metal roof and a woodpile Ramey had stacked in September. From the outside, it looked like the kind of thing a person puts up as a weekend fishing camp and slowly forgets. It looked like exactly nothing. I thanked Ramey and told him I'd be 2 nights. He left a number in case of emergency, and then he left. I got the wood stove going. The cabin was cold enough that I could see my own breath, and it took the better part of an hour before the temperature came up enough that my hands stopped stiffening. I sat on the floor near the stove and waited. Through the east window, the late afternoon light was fading the way it does in the north in December. White to pewter to nothing, and then it was dark. When the room was warm enough, I took the envelope out of my jacket. My father's handwriting, the same careful printing he'd used on birthday cards my whole life, slightly angular, no unnecessary flourishes. "Donovan, open only when you're at the property." I opened it. 5 pages written on graph paper from an engineering pad, dated March 2018, 5 years before he died. "Donovan, if you're reading this, I've gone, and you made the trip. Thank you. I wasn't certain you would. You had every reason to assume this was an afterthought. A piece of land at the end of a trail in the middle of nowhere, left to the son who got the remainder of the estate because the remainder was all that was left. I want you to understand, before you read another line, that this is not what happened. In the spring of 1994, I was part of a geological survey contract through the Ontario Ministry of Northern Development. My role was engineering assessment, road access viability, infrastructure potential. One of the geologists on the project was a man named Angus Mackay. He was 43 years old and one of the finest field geologists I've ever encountered. Angus had been working the Canadian Shield for 15 years, and he had the kind of pattern recognition that only comes from covering that much ground on foot. About 60 kilometers north of where you're sitting, Angus found something, a pegmatite formation, a specific type of coarse-grained igneous rock, running through a section of shield that the survey hadn't prioritized. He showed me the samples. He explained what the mineral composition told him. Spodumene, he called it, a lithium-bearing mineral. He said the formation was significant. In 1994, that meant almost nothing in commercial terms. Lithium was used in ceramics, some pharmaceuticals, a few industrial applications. The price was negligible. There was no battery technology requiring it at scale. Angus knew that, but Angus also knew something else. He'd been watching what was happening in electronics. He said, sitting in a truck on a logging road in 1994, that within 20 years the world was going to need rechargeable batteries at a scale no one had yet imagined. He said lithium was going to become a strategic resource. He said this formation was worth protecting. I bought the 160 acres the following spring, $22,000, including the subsurface rights, the mineral rights. The seller thought I was a hunting camp buyer. I let him think that. I built the cabin in 1996. I came twice a year for 27 years. I paid property taxes. I told no one except your mother. In 2017, I commissioned a quiet assessment through a consulting firm in Timmins, a geologist I trusted. The assessment took 8 months. The full report is in a waterproof box beneath the floorboards under the northeast leg of the stove. There is a knot in the board. It lifts out. The assessment confirmed what Angus told me in 1994, and then some. The spodumene deposit runs deeper than the original estimate. The concentration grades are high. The report values the mineral rights at 2017 lithium prices at a minimum of $45 million Canadian. The surface land value is additional. Donovan, lithium prices have been rising steadily since 2017. Every car manufacturer in the world is racing toward a battery-dependent future. The batteries need lithium. Canada has lithium. The cleanest and most politically stable lithium deposits in the world are worth more every year. By the time you read this, I cannot tell you where the numbers stand, but the direction is not difficult to read. I did not leave this to Sterling. I want to be clear about why, because you deserve the honest version. Sterling would have sold within 6 months. He would have found a buyer, taken the cash, and moved it into something on Bay Street. He is very good at that, but this asset is not built for that kind of management. This is a long development, permitting, environmental assessment, production timelines measured in years. It requires patience. It requires someone who is comfortable with slow, careful work. It requires someone who understands that land has its own logic, and that you work with that logic rather than around it. You've been surveying land for 14 years. You know what a legal boundary means and what it doesn't. You know how to sit with a piece of ground and understand it before you do anything to it. That is exactly what this requires. I know I did not say any of this to you while I was alive. I know I gave more of my time to Sterling and told myself it was because the business needed it. That was partly true and mostly convenient. The fuller truth is simpler and less flattering. I didn't know how to reach you. You were always very self-contained, very complete in yourself, and I defaulted to the easier relationship. I'm sorry for that, Donovan. I can't fix it from here. What I can do is tell you clearly in writing what I couldn't manage to say out loud. I chose you for this because I trust your judgment more than I trust anyone else I know. Not Sterling's ambition. Your judgment. That is the quality this asset requires. Call Angus Mackay before you do anything else. His number is in the box. He retired to Sudbury in 2015, but he has followed this property's potential for 30 years. He will give you the current picture better than I can from 2018. Take your time. The shield has been there for 1 billion years. It will wait for you to understand what you have before you act on it. I love you, Donovan. I wasn't good at saying that while I was here. I'm sorry about that, too. Dad. I sat on the floor of the cabin for a long time. I'm not someone who cries easily, but somewhere around the 3rd time I read the last page, in the heat from the wood stove and the silence that Northern Ontario does in a way I've never heard anywhere else, I found that I was, not loudly, just quietly, the way it happens when something you've been carrying for a long time finally gets set down and you feel the absence of the weight. The floorboard was exactly where he described. The knot was obvious once I was looking for it, inside a steel box sealed with a rubber gasket. The 2017 assessment report, 47 pages, signed by a professional geologist with an Ontario registration, survey maps from 1994 and 2016, a plain business card for Angus Mackay with his Sudbury address and phone number written on the back in my father's printing, a typed list of 2 consultants, a woman in Vancouver, a firm in Ottawa, and a final note, 3 sentences: the box is yours, don't rush, build something that lasts. I drove to Sudbury the next morning. Angus Mackay was 72 years old and lived in a bungalow near Laurentian University, and when I called from outside town he told me to come by at noon. He made coffee and we sat at his kitchen table for 3 hours. He had the assessment report pulled up on his laptop before I arrived. Your father undervalued it, he said, not unkindly. He was conservative by nature, which served him well, but 2017 lithium prices aren't 2023 prices. The EV sector has done things to the lithium market that nobody in 1994 would have believed. He turned the laptop so I could see the chart. Spodumene concentrate was around $400 a ton when he commissioned the assessment. It's been trading significantly higher. He walked me through the geology, the formation, the grade, the depth of the deposit. He explained what a hard rock lithium mine in Ontario would require in terms of permitting, what the production timeline looked like, and what kind of partnership structure made sense for someone in my position. The property is valuable for 3 reasons, Angus said. The grade is high, the jurisdiction is clean, Ontario is a stable regulatory environment, and that matters more than people realize when you're talking about mine development, and the mineral rights are intact, held by a single private owner. The major mining companies have been assembling land packages in this region for a decade. Your father knew exactly what he had. He was waiting for the right person to take it forward. He refilled the mugs. I'd say conservatively, given current markets, you're looking at somewhere between 95 and 120 million Canadian, depending on how you structure the development and who you bring in as a partner. I said he thought about 100 million. That sounds about right, give or take. I drove back to Hamilton 2 days later. I said nothing to Sterling. I said nothing to Tara, who had already begun posting photographs of herself at restaurants with captions about new chapters and trusting her instincts. I went back to work on Monday and filed a request for a 6-week personal leave. My supervisor asked if I needed anything. I said I just needed time to handle the estate. I spent those 6 weeks reading the assessment report 3 times in full, the Ontario Mining Act, federal environmental assessment processes, the NI 43101 standard, the Canadian regulatory requirement for public disclosure of mineral projects, which I needed to understand before I could make sense of anything a legitimate partner would say to me. I met the Vancouver consultant on a video call in January. I met the Ottawa firm in person in February. In March, I drove back up and walked the property again with a licensed geologist from the Vancouver firm in Ramey, who knew every corner of those 160 acres better than anyone living. In August of 2024, I signed a partnership agreement with a junior mining company based in Vancouver that had a production track record and the capital structure to move a project like this through permitting into production. The agreement valued the property at $108 million Canadian. They contributed $3.5 million upfront for a minority stake and took responsibility for leading the permitting process. First production was projected for late 2026 or early 2027. My name was on the agreement, my father's name was in the recitals, acknowledged as the original holder of the mineral rights. I resigned from the survey firm in September with 2 weeks' notice. My colleagues took me for lunch on King Street and asked what I was planning. I said I was working on a land development project up north. They assumed I'd taken a position with a larger firm. I didn't correct that. December 2024. Sterling hosted Christmas at the Oakville house, my parents' house, which Claudette had begun to quietly remodel in ways that were tasteful and impersonal. I drove out from Sudbury, where I'd moved in October, to be closer to the project. I brought wine. At the end of dinner, after the kids had gone to watch something in the other room, Sterling put his hands flat on the table and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been building to something for a while. "I want to say something," he said. "Claudette and I have talked about this for weeks. The estate wasn't divided fairly. Dad's decision, whatever he was thinking, the result is that I received the bulk of everything, and you received a property you can't realistically do much with. And I want to make it right. We'd like to transfer $100,000 to you. No strings, no conditions. Family takes care of family." I looked at my brother across the table. Sterling Firth, Bay Street lawyer, Forest Hill, Volvo Chianti, Forest Hill. He was offering me $100,000 because he genuinely believed it was a meaningful gesture, and he genuinely believed I needed it. He was not performing. He was being kind in the only way he knew how to be kind, which was the way that cost him something he could quantify. "That's very generous, Sterling." "I mean it." "I know you do." I held his look for a moment. "I'm okay. I'm genuinely okay. I'm working on the property, Dad's property." "The cabin?" "The land." He waited for more. I didn't give him more. Claudette glanced at my brother. Sterling looked uncertain and then uncertain about his uncertainty. "If you need money..." "I don't, but thank you, I mean that." He still didn't know. Nobody in my family knew. The partnership agreement was confidential until the company's public disclosure obligations were triggered at a later permitting stage. My name wasn't on any press release. The consultants knew, Angus knew, Ramey knew, my lawyer knew. That was the entire list. It's spring now, 2025. I'm 40 years old. I rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Sudbury with enough room for a proper desk. I drive a used Honda CR-V with 200,000 kilometers on it. I still wear the same Carhartt jacket I bought in 2019. Nothing about my daily life from the outside looks like anything has changed. But the permitting file has cleared 2 major stages. The environmental baseline study is nearly complete. The Vancouver firm has moved through the preliminary work with a discipline that reminds me exactly why I chose them over the alternatives. The timeline is holding. Tara got engaged in March. She posted a photograph, cushion-cut diamond, a caption that said, "When you know, you know." A mutual friend sent it to me. I looked at it for about 20 seconds and then closed the app and went back to the technical report I was reading. She made her assessment. She had incomplete information. She arrived at a conclusion that made sense given what she could see, and what she could see was not what was there. I don't carry anything against her for it. I can only note that the gap between what a person looks like and what a person is can be very large, and that closing it requires a kind of patience that not everyone has. My father's letter is in my desk drawer. I've read it more times than I can count. The graph paper has gone soft at the folds. The last page, the one where he says he's sorry and that he loves me, I read that one the most. He was not a demonstrative man. He never told me he was proud of me. He didn't build me up the way fathers are supposed to. But somewhere between 1994, when he bought 160 acres of Canadian Shield on the word of a geologist he trusted, and 2018, when he wrote 5 pages of graph paper and sealed them in an envelope and hid them under a floorboard in a bush cabin north of Hearst, he had made a decision about who I was. He decided, in the careful and private way he decided all things, that I was the son who would do the right thing with something that required patience and judgment and the willingness to sit with difficulty without needing it to resolve immediately. He staked a $108 million asset on that decision. I think about that sometimes, standing on the property in the early morning when I drive up for site visits. The Shield is granite, billions of years old. The black spruce doesn't care what I'm worth. The creek along the north edge runs the same way it ran when my father stood at the edge of the back field and looked at the rock formation and thought about what was underneath it and made sure it was still there. He built something in silence, in the space between the visible and the invisible, and he left it for the son who was patient enough to go find it. I found it. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone who was supposed to see you clearly looked straight at you and missed entirely? And the worst part was, for a while, you almost believed their version? Have you ever been handed something that looked like nothing, a piece of land, a closed door, a life that from the outside looked like the remainder of something rather than the thing itself, and started to wonder if maybe they were right about you? I'm asking because I know what it costs to keep going when the people closest to you have already written your ending. I know what it feels like to sit at your own kitchen table while someone catalogs your smallness in front of witnesses. And I know what it feels like to drive 800 kilometers to a cabin in the bush because your father, who never quite learned to say what he meant, left you a letter instead. Go to the cabin, open the letter, read it all the way through, even the parts that hurt, because sometimes the person who was watching you most carefully was the one who said the least. And sometimes the thing that looked like nothing was exactly what they valued most. Leave a comment below. I read everyone. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who's been told they got the leftover life. Tell them to go to the cabin, tell them to open the letter, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.